Okay, so we have gone live. We begin. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's conversation titled Pandemic and the Shifting Pedagogical Paradigms. We are indeed lucky to have with us Professor Samantak. So let me begin by introducing our honorable guest. Samantak is Professor of Comparative Literature and Director of the School of Cultural Texts and Records, Jadavpur University. He is also the Director of the university's Internal Quality Assurance Cell. He has written and lectured on 19th century literature, translation, the relationships between the biological sciences and literature, environment, ecology, rural development and education in journals, magazines, and newspapers in India and abroad, including the Times Higher Education Supplement, Economic and Political Weekly, Interventions, International Journal of Postcolonial Studies, the Times of India, the Statesman, the Telegraph, the Indian Express, the Hindu, and Biblio, among others. He has led or jointly led several national and international projects, including on language learning, digitizing ephemera, creating databases, and so on. He is also a volunteer for an NGO that provides vocational training for economic rehabilitation to impoverished young women and men in rural Bengal. A very warm welcome to you, sir, and thanks for accepting my invitation to have this conversation with me, despite your busy schedule.
Wonderful to be here with you, Shore.
Thank you, sir. So let us start, and I will start at the very beginning. My first question to you, there is a general perception that the COVID-19 scenario has wrecked the education system in India. But is it rather not that the COVID-19 scenario, more than jeopardizing the education system, has exposed the already crumbling state of Indian education? I mean, that I'm not saying that the COVID-19 scenario has not taken its toll, but were things going well before that? I'm talking in terms of gross enrollment ratio, GER, allocation for the educational budget, stipulation of more funds for the quote-unquote productive STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, at the cost of the humanities and social sciences, and the promotion of courses that generate marketable graduates rather than focus on research and development. What are your views on this?
Well, I agree with what you have said. I think in order to answer this question, we have to go back approximately, 26 years, when the first private universities, in the sense in which we understand them now, were set up. Back when you joined Bishwabharati, when did you join? I forget. When did you join?
95.
Yeah. 95. Yeah. So long time ago. Your students will know exactly how old you are. You look old.
I don't hide. Okay, thank you.
But what I was saying is that in those days, when one thought of getting into a college, one almost invariably thought of entering something that was either funded and run by the government, like Bishwabharati, like Jadavpur, like JNU, whatever. Or if one went into a quote-unquote private institution, it was also something which was still relatively affordable. You know, something like a St. Xavier's, for example, or a Loreto, which were run by or the Ramakrishna Mission, Vidya Mandir. Private for-profit universities start coming up approximately around 94, 95. And in these 25 years, you will, if you look at the figures, the All India Survey of Higher Education 2019, if you look at it, you will see that about 70% of all students after school, at the tertiary level, whether pursuing undergraduate degrees or higher degrees, almost 70% now attend private institutions. Now, why has this become possible? This has become possible because the government has totally neglected, and I don't mean any particular government. Since 1966, every single government has kept repeating the mantra that 6% of the GNP or the GDP, the Kothari Commission's recommendation was 6% of the GNP, gross national product. Yeah. Subsequently, in the first National Education Policy of 1968, it was stated to be 6% of GNP, subsequently 6% of GDP. And the recently released National Education Policy 2020 repeats that same magic figure of 6%. But government has never gone beyond a maximum of 3.6, 3.7%. You will find claims of 4.5%, but if you get rid of things like infrastructure for NPTEL and so on and so forth, it comes down to less than 4%, say 4%. Now, if you don't invest in higher education, you're not going to be able to have quality. And so what the government did instead, starting from the Congress governments in the mid-90s, Narasimha Rao government and so on and so forth, they have allowed private players to enter the field. Now, although educational institutions are supposed to be not for profit, they in fact use this very convenient term of excess of income over expenditure, which is the same thing as profit. So they charge you high fees. And why would you be spending money for your child's education if you are not certain that the amount that you had invested would be recovered in a fairly brief span of time? And it is from then that we see this proliferation of institutes which offer, as you very rightly said, degrees in management, technical disciplines like medicine or engineering, and in the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, to the detriment of the broad humanities and social sciences. If you look at what is common to these disciplines, you will see that they are all disciplines in which it is possible to enter the job market. Market ready is again another buzzword, and to start earning as soon as you leave. Yeah. And so that is the first thing that has happened. Second, and this is as a direct consequence of the government not investing what it said it would invest. If we discuss the National Education Policy 2020, I'll come back to that. What is a policy? What is the difference between laws and so forth? The second thing that has happened, and that for that this government is to be held responsible, is this entire business of introducing the notion of competition and ranking into higher education.
Yes.
Now, prior to this, the National Assessment and Accreditation Council was set up, NAAC, and universities and colleges started getting accredited from the late 90s onwards, which was overall not a bad thing, because when we criticize government, we must also recognize that we are not beyond criticism, that far too many colleges, far too many universities, and I am, sorry to say, far too many teachers don't do what they are mandated to do, what they are paid to do. So, accusations of corruption, accusations of laziness, of not attending classes, of not spending enough time in the institutions which hire them. There is substantial basis for this. So when the NAC was set up, it was a grading agency. It graded you. They have changed the grading. So it was numbers, grades, stars, letter grades, star grades. It doesn't matter. But at the end of that process, you were able to assess where you were going wrong, and you were also able to get some kind of an idea of where you could go to make things right. And this assessment was carried out by your peers. So for a college, a bunch of college teachers, a couple of university teachers would go and visit you. These are people who are familiar with what was happening, and therefore they were able to judge. They were also, and I've written about this, they were also able to take into account the differences that exist between institutions of higher learning. Let's say the college where you are now a professor and the university where I am a professor. It is like comparing apples and oranges. I cannot expect to get the same output from your college that I can expect to get from a college located in a metropolitan area. Similarly, for a university, it is not fair to expect the same kind of output from, let us say, Vidyasagar University as it is to expect, as we can expect from Vishwabharati or Rabindra Bharati or Jadavpur. Each university has its own unique character and should be judged according to that character. Now, the NAC, despite its failings, despite its problems, despite charges of favoritism, corruption, and all of that, was not doing such a bad job. By and large, colleges and universities were getting a better understanding for their own improvement. So this was an absolute score. Theoretically, you could have a situation where, let's say, 100 colleges and universities are assessed, and all of them get the best score, all of them get the worst score. Now, with the introduction of the National Institutional Ranking Framework from 2016-17 onwards, what has happened is that we are being forced to compete with each other. And there are several major problems with this kind of competitiveness. The first problem is that you are not assessed by your peers. These are metrics that are set up, which usually never take into account these regional differences. They are assessed by third-party companies, which are basically IT firms, which look at your figures and judge them. There is no attempt at verification. Forget about on-the-ground verification. There is not even verification in terms of how data changes from year to year. So I will give you one small example. Okay, Saurabh, stop me if I'm talking too much, But I just want to give you one example here because I think what you said is very important.
No, please continue.
Let's say 1 year I say that the gender ratio in my university or college, educational institution, is 60:40, women to men. Fine. Next year, right, I say it is 80:20. Now, there is no way in which in the span of 1 year, the gender ratio can change so much. So there should be something which is built into the software which checks your yearly data and how it progresses. Even worse, I don't know whether you've done this, but unfortunately, as you mentioned, I'm in charge of the IQAC, which files these reports to the NIRF. Very often, you have to give the data for the same year over successive years. So let's say in 2020, you have to give data for 17, 18, 19. In 2019, you have to give it for 15, 16, 17. So the same data has to be provided over several years. And it is a most unfortunate case that several institutions, including reputed institutions, and I will not name them because this is being recorded, although the proof is there, they have given completely changed data for the same year in subsequent years. Please understand. So in 1919, I am saying that the median salary earned by my graduates is 4 lakhs a year. Graduates of the year 1917. So in 1919, I am saying that in 20. Why am I saying 19? In 2019, I'm saying that 20, people who graduated in 2016 got a median salary of 4 lakhs of rupees a year. In 2020, I am saying that that same cohort of 2017 earned a median salary of 8 lakhs a year. I'm not making this up. This is a real instance. Now, there's no verification. There is no kind of comparison about where the jumps are going. And so what has unfortunately happened is that the NIRF has become a kind of examination in which there are no invigilators in the room. You can use whatever means that you like. And it's really an open invitation to fudging data, lying or cheating if you like. And then this grand, ceremony in Delhi. I unfortunately been to a couple of them where the ranks are declared. And this is the real point. Funding is now tied to rankings. What this means is that you are being judged on a set of criteria which don't necessarily apply to you. B, you are being encouraged to lie. And C, your future is dependent on how efficiently you lie, and funds are given to you as a result of this. Now, this is happening down the line for the Rashtriya Uchatar Shiksha Abhiyan, for the Institution of Eminence scheme, in both of which Jadavpur University has done rather well. And I would like to think that we haven't lied in order to get these. But conditionalities are being put to you. So there's this creeping control. And instead of increasing the size of the cake, we have reduced the size of the cake, and we have skewed the distribution of resources. if you look at the history of education in Asia, I'm not talking of the developed West. Typically, we compare ourselves to the US.
I think Shamantabda's connection is giving him a bit of problem, so we'll wait for him to get his net connection back.
Or to England or Germany.
Okay, we have him.
Yeah, I'm back. So could you hear me?
You got disconnected for a.
Yeah,
you got disconnected. Shuntapachi, you got disconnected for a few seconds, but it's okay. Please continue.
Right. So what I'm saying is that, instead of increasing the size of the cake, you have reduced the size of the cake, and you're now allocating on certain criteria which are bizarre. As you very rightly said, you are privileging STEM disciplines, and you're asking for data which it is almost impossible for most of the colleges and universities to produce. And yet, I think there are two other things I want to say before I end. The first is that media has a very important role to play in educating the public about this. We are obsessed with scores. Amartya Sen has an essay called The Country of First Boys. In fact, it's the title of a book. We are obsessed with toppers. We are obsessed with rankers. And we don't look at the reasons why everybody is not getting the best scores. And government is perfectly happy with this because it means they don't have to spend more money. They can use the money that they have and give it to already well-funded institutions and claim to have done a great deal for education. So this was the situation prior to COVID-19. And I'm entirely in agreement with you, Saurabh, that our educational system, and let us concentrate on higher education for the time being, was already in many ways broken when the pandemic hit us.
Okay.
That's my long answer to the short question.
Okay. That was a very well laid out answer, but this raises two doubts in my mind. The replacement of the NIRF in place of NAC. So NAC was a kind of a hand-holding institution which not only graded.
It's not a replacement. But both there. NAC was
my point is. NAC was a kind of a hand-holding institution, but one of the parameters of NIRF is that they rank you on the kind of salary, the annual salary remuneration that your graduates are getting. Now, my point is it correct to rank an institution only on the employability or the salary of the students? Many people after graduation can go off to do their masters or research. So according to NIRF, that institution who are producing very good researchers, who are producing people who are doing their further studies, they are not ranked at all. They'll get very poor ranks. So is this the correct spirit?
Yeah. Well, that's not the most important aspect of the ranking, but I'll tell you there's a more fundamental problem, which is that institutions are supposed to provide what is called an account of student progression. That is to say, when a student finishes his or her studies at an institution, what is she doing afterwards? Now, there is no institutional mechanism in any college or university in India, public college or university, to record this. After you finished your graduation in Vishwabharati, if you had decided to go off and do something else, you were under no compulsion to let us know what you were doing.
Yeah, correct.
If you had decided to continue with your master's there, after you finish your master's, you decide, okay, fine, I'm through with Vishwabharati, I want to, go off and walk in the mountains for a year or whatever. You are under no compulsion to tell us what you are doing. In fact, the NIRF and also NAC ask us, universities like us, how many of your students have got the NET? Now, there is no institutional mechanism whereby we can record it. The only way in which we can keep track is if students come and tell us. Now, let's say you've graduated in the year you've finished your master's in 2016. You don't necessarily have to get the NET that year. You can get it in 2017 or 2018. you may be working somewhere, doing something, and then you appear for the net once or twice and you get it. Again, no compulsion to let us know. So it is not merely a question of asking for salaries, which is wrong. It is also a question of asking for student progression, where there is no mechanism to record what students are doing. If it is bad for a premier institution like Jadavpur University, it is far worse for colleges, because typically most government colleges in India are undergraduate colleges. And after the students finish their studies in the undergraduate colleges, they may not go on to the home university. What university is your college under, Shorab?
Kolkata University.
What college the university? Okay, it's
the University of Kolkata.
Yeah, but
Calcutta University, yes.
Yeah, okay. So you're still under University of Calcutta. So after they finish their bachelor's in Calcutta, from your university, where they get a BA degree from Calcutta University or a BSc degree, they may choose to go to Bardhaman University. They may choose to go to Jadavpur. There is no way in which they have to inform you where they are going. There is no record keeping which is done. So this entire notion of we will judge an institution in terms of the progress of its students is good in theory, but almost impossible to keep track of unless there is some kind of a mechanism whereby you are forced to tell your institution where you are going next. And yet it is these which go on to create the ranking of institutions. So it's extremely unfortunate. I mean, the business of insisting on salaries is perhaps the most pernicious part of it. But even something you mentioned about researchers. Fine, you are producing people who are going on to become researchers. But if I were to ask you or your college, can you tell me how many of your graduates past 5 years have gone on to do research and where? You will not be able to tell me, because there is no mechanism whereby students have to inform you. So there are ways out of this. We can create a national database. We can have people and countries around the world. Many countries in the world are doing this. That the moment you enter the higher education system, you are given a specific ID which will remain with you for the rest of your life. Something like an Aadhaar number. You could probably use the Aadhaar for that as well. That whatever you do, it is recorded. Wherever you go, it is recorded. In terms of employment, in terms of study and research and so on and so forth. And then we don't have to run around, telling our students, telling our teachers, hey, jao, WhatsApp group pe bolo, kojo ache na ache, so on and so forth. And you can just, provide the data. So they're asking for data which is not available. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So your first question, your answer to my first question brings another question to my mind. That is, see, the school education in India was already in the hands of the private players, the quality school education, of course, with a few exceptions. So slowly, the higher education is going in that same direction. So what about the students who are from the economically or financially weaker backgrounds? And if you just say that, what does the national education policy tell us about this? Are they actually consciously shifting this onus from the government's this onus from government's house to the private houses?
Okay, see, this I have already answered part of your question in response to your first one. Governments and the center have already encouraged private players in education for the last 25 years. And that has only become more and more rapid. It's a process that has become accelerated. Yes, in the last few years. And this has happened under all kinds of governments. It is not only the BJP government in the center which is doing it. It was done here by the left front government. The privatization or the setting up of, the West Bengal State University or various universities to which private colleges were being affiliated, medical colleges, engineering colleges, happened under the left front. It is continuing under the Trinamool government. And in other states with, governments from different political parties, this is a process which is underway. I don't know the exact figure. I would have to look it up. But I suspect well over 50% of the graduates in medicine and engineering now emerge from private institutions. Some of them are not worth the grounds on which their buildings have been built. There have been big questions raised about the quality. And despite the fact that state governments and the central government, the AICTE, Medical Council of India, they are trying to keep track of what is happening. One knows very, easily exactly the kind of education that is being imparted here. So the privatization part, Saurabh, is not something that you can blame this present government at the center for. And it is only accelerating. Coming to the one little bit of your question about the National Education Policy 2020. Now, thanks to your prodding, I actually went through the 60-page National Education Policy with some care, and on the face of it, it does address, it does mention these problems. It speaks of deprived sections, it speaks of marginalized sections, and there is little or no attempt for a kind of Hinduization of higher education, at least as far as the policy itself is concerned. Now, I want to make it very clear that I am talking of the document. I am not trying to second guess the reasons why this document was created. That's the first point. Second point that I would like to make is that we must remember that this is merely a policy. In order to turn the policy recommendations into actual facts on the ground, legislation will have to be passed. And that legislation will have to be passed both by the center and by states. Because remember, education is on the concurrent list. So states have every right to pass legislation, as does the center. You will remember that having studied in a central university, Vishwabharati, and I have worked in a central university, I now work in a state university, there are considerable differences when it comes to financial matters, when it comes to administrative matters, when it comes to curricular matters. There is a wide divergence that can exist, and I think it's good that it exists. I think it is a good thing that it exists. So we must read the policy, keeping this in mind that this is not something that is going to happen tomorrow. It is something that may happen if government decide to do it. Honestly, I will tell you, I see it as part of a kind of election strategy, for various states and so on and so forth. It is an electoral strategy which has been put forward, and it says a lot of really quite wonderful things, including extending the right to education up to the age of 18, which says, where school education is concerned, it speaks about marginalized communities, it speaks about increasing gross enrollment ratio to 100% by 2035 at the school level. It speaks of increasing gross enrollment ratio to 50% by 2030 at the university level, college and university level, at the tertiary level. So it makes all the right noises. The big gap, the big black hole in the room, is that it doesn't seem to say anything whatsoever about where the money is going to come from. And I was amused to see that, 54 years after the Kothari Commission report, that same 6% of the GDP is repeated in the new so-called new national education policy, right in the beginning. I'll try and dig it out and read out that bit to you. That's what I wanted to say. Next question, Saurabh.
Yeah. So I move on. So I come to the next, the burning question in mind now, that is the COVID-19 scenario. Now that seemed to have forced a paradigm shift in the way classes are being conducted. Online classes have become the order of the day. Of course, this was perhaps the only alternative. I don't disagree. But this has made the digital divide even more glaring. Now, thankfully, our state government, the West Bengal state government, have given us the liberty, the universities and colleges, a lot of leeway, liberty in conducting online classes, a choice between synchronized, non-synchronized, or a combination of both. But then, considering the heterogeneous composition of the students of our educational institutes, there is no guarantee that we are being able to include everyone into its fold. So we have the recent instance of a family in Himachal Pradesh who had to sell off their only cow so that the father could buy a smartphone for their 2 children to attend classes. Or the case in Kerala where a class 9 girl committed suicide because she did not have the facilities to attend online classes. Now, what do you think are the other major problems of this form of teaching, both for the teachers and the students? And what is the solution? What might be the solution?
That's a huge question, and you would probably find volumes that can be written and said about. I will deal with it very, I hope, not too unsystematic manner. First of all, it's unfortunate that somebody had to sell a cow, or some young person committed suicide. But we should not be misled by these outliers. These are not representative of what is happening. These are extreme examples.
Yes, correct.
Every year, after the higher secondary results, or after the IIT results, or after the first semester exams of IITs, there are numbers of suicides. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that the IIT model is wrong. I happen to think there are problems with it, but that's another discussion. But simply because students kill themselves because they don't get into colleges of their choice, that should not be an indictment of the college system or the college education system. So much as I have all sympathy for the parents who sold their cow to buy a smartphone for their child, and much as I have sympathy for the family of the young woman who killed herself, these should not guide our responses to the what is happening to the higher education scenario or the education scenario as a consequence of the novel coronavirus pandemic. I want to make a few points. Everybody is talking of the digital divide. Now, what does the digital divide actually mean? I think we need to recognize the fact that the digital divide is a symptom of a larger divide which seems to be accelerating as a result of the pandemic, which is an economic divide. Many homes, and I don't know whether you've carried out a survey in your own college, but my experience says that a substantial proportion of homes with school or college going children in them, even in rural Bengal, have smartphones. But in a family where there are 2 children or even 3 children, there may be just one smartphone. Now, who is going to use that smartphone when? Are the parents going to use that smartphone? Is the father or the mother or even perhaps the uncle going to use the smartphone? Is the older daughter going to use that smartphone? Is the younger boy going to use that smartphone? Invariably, you will find that it is the boy who is being given the opportunity to use the smartphone. So the economic divide between those who can afford several kind of devices and those who cannot is growing. The gender divide is growing as well. If I have a son and a daughter and just one smartphone at home, it is unfortunately likely to be the case that the smartphone will be reserved for use of the son, or at least the son will get first priority in using the smartphone. So that is the second thing that is happening. Third, when we talk of online classes, we need to be very sure and distinguish between 2 kinds of online classes. In fact, the second probably shouldn't even be called online at all. The first is synchronous online, which is something like this happening now. You and I are speaking to each other separated by several hundreds of miles. I don't know where you are, but your college and mine, we are separated by several hundreds of miles. Presumably, a few people are watching this and they are also separated from us by several hundreds of miles. And it is all happening in real time. Now, when this is recorded, if you're recording it and it's up on YouTube, somebody can watch it later on. Tomorrow, nobody will want to watch it. That's another problem. But if anybody did, they will be able to watch it later on. So that is asynchronous online education. And also, there is the possibility of using electronic means, whether it is WhatsApp, whether it is email, whether it is YouTube, to upload things which people can download later on. I can tell you of our own experience. When the pandemic broke and when it became clear to us that it was not going away in a hurry, in my department, which is the Department of Comparative Literature at Jadavpur University, we first carried out a survey to find out how many of our students had access to at least one smartphone and some data plan. How many had, in addition to the smartphone, a laptop, in addition to a laptop, a desktop computer, whatever. And we found that less than 10% of our students had only one smartphone, or maybe about 10%. So that's 30 out of 300. But these are the elites of Kolkata for the most part. We did, however, find in other departments the number going up to 20%, 30%, people who either had a very basic phone or just one smartphone which they shared with others. And these are for students who come from rural areas. We do have a substantial number of students who come from rural Bengal. And of course, things became worse after Amphan when a lot of property was destroyed. So if we take a survey, a proper survey of who has what, then it may be possible for us to supplement it. So somebody has a smartphone but can't afford a high-speed data plan. Is there some way in which we can provide her with that data plan? Somebody doesn't have a smartphone for exclusive use. Is there some way in which we can give her that smartphone? I believe that it is possible to do it at the level of individual institutions such as a college, such as a university, provided the will is there. Once all students have at least a smartphone and some kind of a data connection, even a 2G connection, it is possible to continue interaction with them. Interaction need not be real-time interaction. I remember when you and Vijay and others were, studying, well, within quotes, studying in Vishwavanti. Okay. We would play cricket, we would do things. And there was a great deal of interaction that happened in the classroom and outside the classroom. Now, that may not happen. But what you can do is you can give them materials, you can give them, notes, links to various videos or text and so on and so forth, and they can respond, they can come back to it. One model that some of us are following goes like this, that for every course, not every class, every course, the students create a Gmail ID, which every one of the students in that course can access. And they write to the teacher, let's say in that case you or me, saying that this is the email ID from which we will be receiving and sending materials for this course. Then you send them the first bunch of materials, which may be the text itself, some background readings. You remember, as we used to do backgrounds, text, and so on and so forth. In those days, we photocopied or made notes. Now we can just upload PDFs, legal or illegal. We can upload notes and so on and so forth. And then you give them a week's time. And then what we've done is we've identified 1 or 2 students in the class, maybe 3, who will gather all the questions from their peers and put it together and send it back to you. Once it's sent back to you, you read the questions, you reflect upon them, you do your little homework, and then maybe 2, 3, 4 days later, you record some lectures, audio recordings, not video. The length, I've been doing this for several months now, and I can tell you that the size of approximately 45-minute lecture, once you compress it, is about 9 MB. You can record it, you can convert it to MP, and there's a good audio compressor available. I'm not TM Krishna or Balmurali Krishnan that my every note has to be heard. If you can more or less make out what I'm saying, that's good enough. So you record it and you compress it and you send it to this email. Students will access it when possible. And what has often happened is that because a lot of students don't use email very regularly, others will send it, download it from the email and send it to them via WhatsApp. And a 9 MB file, a 9 MB file is not a very large file. And if it's an audio recording, you just plug in your earphones or just hold it up to your ear and you listen to what the teacher is saying. Maybe I'm coming down with COVID. And so it goes. And so it goes. You send materials, they respond to you. I've even had students sending me little audio clips of questions. They put it into this Gmail account, and I use it. And the reason why I prefer email is because it lasts much longer. Many students, many teachers, including myself until recently, have mobile phones with fairly small memory or storage capacities. So the tendency is to wipe out these conversations and you lose it. But if it's there in your email, it's there. You can access it whenever you want. So it is possible to use electronic means to carry out an academic exchange with one's students. Of course, It is more difficult when it comes to science subjects or engineering or medicine. But I was discussing this a couple of days ago with some of my friends in the science and engineering faculties. And they've said that for lab work, what they often try to do now is they have lectures. They either record lectures, video or audio record lectures on the kind of theoretical foundation for an experiment. Every experiment that you perform is premised on a theory, right? So that theoretical, maybe it's resistance, electrical resistance, whatever, Bernoulli's principle, etc., etc., etc. You talk about the theory, then you demonstrate it to them. Either you demonstrate it yourself, or you get a video from some other source, a legally downloadable free video, and you let them watch it. And for simple experiments, many of the simpler experiments in physics and chemistry can actually be carried out at home. I think we as teachers need to think innovatively. We as teachers need to think of ways in which we can reach our students. And students also need to respond. Speaking for myself, I can tell you, very obviously not every student has responded, but a large enough number have responded. And what often happens is, after I've started discussing academic things, my kind of quote-unquote style of teaching. So I never remain confined to the text. I try and relate it to our lives and so on and so forth. So then what happens? The questions expand. And I've been having this one continuous conversation with some students in the Bangla department of all places, where I also take a course, since early April. So April, May, June, July, 4-month-long conversation which is going on. And it is culminating in the possibility of yet another question-answer session like this, where the students want me to address a slightly larger audience. So things can happen, Saurabh, if we are using these means. The solutions, of course, will not be easy, because there are very large questions of infrastructure. I am extraordinarily fortunate that I am in Kolkata, where I have good internet connection, even though my internet is not working. But, I have options. If my local cable doesn't work, as it is not working, I've switched over to a mobile hotspot. I can do that. Students may not be able to do that in rural areas. So it is necessary to build up a good mobile telephony infrastructure, so that students are able to access the internet from even in relatively distant places. Second is to make sure that students actually have these devices, at least a decent smartphone, preferably a laptop. And if they don't have it, government and institutions and maybe even the corporate sector, there's something called CSR, corporate social responsibility.
Yes,
and it may be possible to get some companies interested that, for this college, we will sponsor the 50 or 60 or 80 smartphones that are necessary. If we think creatively, and more importantly, if we think cooperatively, that we are all doing this together, then we will be able to overcome this situation. The unfortunate part is that instead of thinking cooperatively, we are thinking politically. Every single day, some political party or the other is accusing some other party of exploiting the COVID-19 pandemic for their own narrow selfish ends. And that is going to be extraordinarily harmful in the future, if I'm any judge.
Okay. Thank you for the very elaborate answer. My next question may land you and me in trouble, but I cannot but ask this question. The UGC's flip-flop on the final semester, final year exams. If you remember, towards the end of April, they had said that was not necessary. In July, early July, they said, in July, yes, they had said that it is absolutely necessary. And they had also gone on to say that the states must, I repeat, must conduct the final year or final semester exams before qualifying the students. Now, my point is that they have also said that they can take action against a state that does not comply with this. Now, this is the same UGC that doesn't bat an eyelid when its pay commission recommendations are either rejected or delayed or tweaked. And it is coming down so hard on this issue, even at the health risk of the students and the teachers and the other people involved. I mean, so is this decision purely academic, or how do you see this?
This decision is purely political. I have no qualms in saying it because I think I sent a link to you of my last piece published in the Telegraph. You know, did I send you that link where I write in
you did. Yes.
It's a purely political decision. It is a political decision, and it is something which is absolutely despicable. This is something which is akin to the way in which the Nazis and the authoritarian Soviet government sent young children out to fight in the front lines during the Second World War. It is despicable. I have no qualms in saying this because this decision has already caused untold mental anguish to literally millions of students across the country.
Yes.
Millions of students.
Yes.
Now, make up your mind. You know, in that first advisory, you actually had statements which said a balance of previous semester marks and internal assessments for the present semester and so on and so forth. I have quoted this. And then you say the final exams are absolutely compulsory, and you give a whole list of reasons that without the final examination marks. I mean, I sometimes wonder what these guys were smoking when they wrote this. You know, I would like a taste of that because they're obviously, you know, completely out of touch with reality. The more than the, the implementation of the pay commission and so on and so forth. So, Rob, I draw your attention to the fact that since I keep saying 19, I'm a 19.
19, yes.
It should be. You know, from 2015, they have been harping on CBCS, choice-based credit system, choice-based credit system. What is the hallmark of the choice-based credit system? The semester. What is the hallmark of the semester? That you are assessed piecemeal. You remember when you were in Vishwa Bharati, I think you had 1 or 2 honors papers at the end of the first year in undergraduate. 1, 3, 4, right? Yeah. 1 and 3. 1, 3, 4.
1, 2, and 1, 2, 5. 1 to 5. 1, 2, and 5.
That's right. Yeah. One paper in the first year, 2 in the second year, 5 in the third year. Now, you've got more or less an equal number of papers spread over 3 years, over 6 semesters. And if you calculate, then a student has already finished and been assessed on well over 80% of her courses when she enters the 6th and final semester in an undergraduate.
Final semester.
And if it's a 4-year 8-semester course, then you're finished close to 90% of your assessment. You have already been assessed. So what is the big deal with the final exam? In the bad old days, in the prehistoric era, when I did my undergraduate degree from Jadavpur University, we had all 8 honors papers at the end of 3 years. That would make sense. If that was the situation now, people could say, look, how the hell can you get a degree without being tested on it? The simple fact of the matter is you have already been tested on well over 80% of your syllabus. And as per the CBCS norms itself, a substantial proportion of any semester assessment is carried out by internal assessments. So, in fact, for a 3-year undergraduate program with 6 semesters, the student has probably already been assessed on 85, 86, 87% of his or her performance. What's the harm in using previous year's performances to give him or her a mark? I see no academic justification for what the UGC wants, and the kind of, the Padak Dada, the local bully kind of thing. It is mandatory. If you don't, what action are they going to take against anybody? They can't take any action. Calcutta University is a university set up by an act of the state of West Bengal. Jadavpur University is a university set up by an act of the state of West Bengal. There is nothing in our acts and statutes which says that we cannot award degrees, and we have the right to fix the norms. If our universities decide to award degrees on the basis of previous year's marks, some kind of assessment, and so on and so forth, given the present situation, we can do so, and it will not stand up to legal scrutiny anywhere. And academically, it is a perfectly valid decision. Consider, for example, the fact that the central boards of education, CBSE, ISC, as well as a lot of state boards, have given the school leaving results where 20, 30, of the exams have not been taken by students. Are those results going to be declared invalid? It's just a kind of bullying attitude on part of the UGC. It shows muddled thinking, and I am 100% certain that this decision was made not on academic grounds, but on party political grounds. Let me make that even clearer. Not just political, but party political grounds. And I have no qualms in saying it. I've written about it. I will continue to speak about it. You're not to blame, sure.
That was...
If they arrest anyone, it will be me.
That was vintage, Samantak. Mincing no words. Okay, my next question. In one of your articles, sir, in a leading English daily, you had suggested the idea of a 0 year during this COVID-19 pandemic period. Would you please elaborate on that concept for the benefit of the viewers?
Okay. When I said 0 year, I thought it was a stylish sort of sexy kind of name, 0 year, whatever. What I basically meant is, if you look at the situation, and I'm talking only of college education, but it applies to schools as well.
Yeah.
All classes ceased after the 13th of March, which is the Friday the 13th. Students have not gone back to classes since 16th March 2020. Okay. Now, typically, the semester ends in June. So, classes go on up to early May. So, if classes begin in January, so January, February, March, April, 4 months of classes. Out of those 4 months of classes, you've had 2.5 months of classes. In fact, not even 2.5 months. Because typically, everywhere in the world, and whatever little I've seen of the world, I have found no exception. Classes tend to start a little slowly. In the beginning of the semester, the teachers are relaxed, the students are relaxed, they're still enjoying the sort of hangover, literal or metaphorical, of their previous, break. And so it takes a bit of time. Then in January, for example, in our state, we've got Netaji Jayanti, we've got Republic Day, and so on and so forth. College fests are held in winter, in January, and so on and so forth. So not a great deal of January. So out of 4 months, let's say half of January, all of February, half of March. That's 2 months out of 4. So half the semester is gone. The COVID pandemic means that the new semester, which would normally have begun in July, we've already lost July. Today is the 2nd of August. We are very likely to lose all of August and much of September again. So we've lost half a semester. The previous semester, we are on the point of losing half a semester this semester. So we have actually already lost a full semester. Now, that half semester that was lost in the previous semester, how are we going to make up for it? Now, I have never understood what this idea of covering a syllabus is, but I do understand that this is necessary to discuss the topics that are in your curriculum, in your text, and so on and so forth. Now, what are we going to do? One option is to say, look, this is this unprecedented, horrible, horrifying thing that has happened to us. Let's take a break. We will continue to interact, as I have suggested earlier, but there will be no formal exams, or if there are, there will be assessments which you can take again later. We will continue speaking with each other, but we will pick up a year later. So the classes that ended on the 13th of March 2020 will resume around the middle of March 2021. And somebody who would have completed her course in June this year will complete her course or his course in June 2021. This will mean that you lose a year. Honestly, I don't think that losing a year at this stage of your life is a big deal if everybody is losing it. If you're not the only person who's losing it. If everybody is losing it. Unfortunately, that is not a decision that anybody seems prepared to take. My suggestion of a 0 year was met with deafening silence from my colleagues, who thought it's yet another mad scheme that this bearded old man has come up with, and they ignored me, intelligently enough. But I would like to say to them that we have already lost one semester, that's half a year. Are we going to lose another semester and de facto have a 0 year with all the mess that it entails? Could we not have thought of a 0 year? Now it's too late to think of a 0 year because schools have published their results. Students are milling about wanting to get into universities. I still think it may be a good idea, if not a 0 year, to have a 0 semester. Because if you think about those who are finishing their +2, sure, we will begin the process of admissions into colleges and universities as per the West Bengal government's order with from the 10th of August, 8 days from now. We will start the process. As to when students will be able to start classes, we have no idea. So effectively, we will lose this semester. Can we think of starting this semester in January, perhaps? That way, you don't have students who finish, quote unquote, complete a course of study with large chunks left out. It may not matter for things that you and I have studied, literature, English, whatever. We can probably make up. There are enough resources on the web. Interact with students, we can make up. But can you imagine the situation where you have a surgeon who cuts open a patient and says, "What's that?" "Oh, pancreas. Oh, I missed that semester. The classes were not held on the pancreas. Sorry."
Courses were shortened. That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Sorry, I never really learned the pancreas. So that was my suggestion, and it was made more in order to provoke people to think about what is actually happening when we are trying to push through this kind of we have to complete on time kind of thing, and how this will have long-term effects on an entire, well, not a generation, but certainly 2 years, 2 batches of students who will necessarily have to undergo truncated courses of study. You're looking around. I think we are running out of time. I don't know.
No, we are not. If you are not, so this being your true disciple, I have gone through your idea of the 0 year, and it sounds academically brilliant. But then I do have a few questions. Like, say, have you thought about the students who have actually taken a loan to complete their course? Even if the interim period, the loan, they'll have to pay it for 1 more year, they repay the loan, the interest at least for 1 more year. And have you also thought of the situation where the students already have an offer letter and they're waiting the results of their final semesters to be declared so that they can join? So does your concept of the 0 year take these into account?
Okay, I must make it clear that my concept of the 0 year does not apply to terminal semester students. So those who have got offer letters will be in the terminal semester. Okay, so because as I said to you earlier, they've completed 5 out of 6 semesters, 7 out of 8 semesters. So they're right at the end, and that's where I think this business of awarding them a degree without necessarily sitting for quote unquote final exams. Incidentally, I don't know why the UGC insists on calling them the final exams. They are not the final exams. They are the final semester exams. They are the terminal semester exams. Why the heck are they calling it the final exams? I don't know. So it doesn't apply to them. So they should, in fact, my sort of idea would be that they would already have received their results and joined the job market by now. So it's not applicable to terminal year students. I am, in fact, more concerned about intermediate semesters. You see what has happened, Showroom. We have spent a great deal of time talking about terminal year students. We are now spending a great deal of time talking about those who are about to enter. The newbies, the freshers. So we are speaking of freshers and we are talking of those who are about to leave. But by far the largest majority of students there in a 3-year course, you've got the first years who have gone into second year and the second years who have gone into third year. What happens to them? Are we not looking at them? And it is for them really that I thought of the 0 year. Your second point about students who are taking loans and so on and so forth is a very good question, because I think it points out to one of the major problems with my scheme of the 0 year, which is that the 0 year really can work in a country like, let us say, Germany or Japan, where almost all of higher education is in the hands of the state. Or in the US, where it's not in the hand of the state, but there is a great deal of coordination between universities, private as well as public. But it cannot work in a country like ours, where some people are paying in Jadavpur University 125 rupees a month, for which someone else is paying 50,000 rupees a month. Right? Now, there can be ways of working around it. One of the things that can happen is that there can be deferral on student loans, as is happening to industrialists. I mean, if Anil Ambani and Ratan Tata can get their loans, their payment schedules pushed back, if ordinary credit card holders can get a moratorium without increased, rates of interest, as was supposed to be happening, I don't know. Why can't students be told that, okay, you don't have to start repaying from now on, you repay it later on? Point one. Yeah. Point two, for this 0 year, can private universities dig into their own resources and charge their students a fraction of the fees? So let's say you charge 25% of the fees for that year. So what happens that if for 4 years, you had to pay, I don't know, 10 lakhs, you will have a 5-year course, and you would pay, you would pay a little bit more than 10 lakhs. So 10 lakhs for a 4-year course works out to 2.5 lakhs per year. So 25% of 2.5 lakhs is whatever, 12 something or the other, 25,000 bucks or something like that, 32,500 rupees. So you pay that little additional in order to basically compensate the private institution for whatever little resources they may be having. Question arises about teachers. What happens to teachers' salaries in private institutions?
Salaries, yes.
When this is happening? Yes. Yeah, but again, this is a one-off scheme. It's not a continuous scheme. So yeah, you'll have to. Maybe the institution will have to take a loan to pay their teachers. You and I, when we started our careers, we were looking at the terminal. At age 60 or 62 or 65 or whatever it is. We were not thinking of the number of batches we would be covering or how many graduating years would come out of how much time we spent. Let's say you take a year off for study leave. Or let's say, God forbid, something happens to you and you have to take a year off because of medical leave. You still get paid. You still receive your salary.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So for people in the public sector, it's not a problem. I don't see why it should become a problem for institutions in the private sector, because they are not exactly roadside vendors. Deen ani deen khai, that whatever I get, I pay my teachers. All of these institutions have fairly deep pockets, and if there can be loan restructuring done for students, it can be done for these institutions as well. If there was a will, things could have been worked out, Shoro. I don't see any problems in doing that.
Okay. So the mindset needs to be changed. The profit-making mindset needs to be changed. Correct, sir. Okay, my next question. I hope I'm not bothering you.
No. You're not bothering me.
Okay, my next question then. Yeah, of course. I can hear you crystal clear. My next question is that given the success of the webinars, the online courses, the short-term courses, and even the validation of online PhD and MPhil vivas, I mean, they were allowed in some institutions prior to this, but now everyone is doing it and it is validated. So, and the pre-COVID-19 online initiatives of the central government, like the MOOCs courses at Swayam and the other things going online, is there a chance that even after COVID-19 threat is neutralized, things are not going to be as they were? Like we'll be shifting to this online basis on a large scale. And do you think that online classes should be the primary mode of education, because that takes away the joy of learning with our fellow students, learning directly from our teachers? So I would like your views on that, sir.
Okay, so there were 3 questions actually that you asked. The first had to do with the success of webinars and things like that. The second had to do with things like for MPhil, PhDs, vivas, and examinations online, and the third had to do with whether online is the future. Okay, my sort of counter question to your first question would be: do you really think these are successes? Do you really think webinars are successes? I don't. I have addressed this. I was trying to calculate. I don't even know whether you call this a webinar. I think this is the 7th or the 8th one that I have done. And I find them, frankly, very, very inhuman, because I can't see the people I'm addressing. And even when I can see the people whom I'm addressing in a Zoom or Google Meet, they will switch off the video, claiming that their internet connection is dodgy, and I know they are just completely bored and they're buggered off somewhere, gone to have a smoke or a coffee. I do that when I'm supposed to attend. So that kind of real human interaction doesn't take place. So I don't think these are successes by any yardstick. The only success is that for younger academics, such as you, caught in the trap of API and so on and so forth, you will get certificates saying attended this, attended that, and you will be able to write it when you apply for promotion. These are not successes. Every single person I've spoken to in India and abroad, my friends, some of whom, the one good thing I'll tell you is that I have actually participated in webinars in which friends from abroad have been present. They have interacted in a limited way, which would not have been possible unless they had got travel grants to come to India and so on. And that's the only thing which was kind of nice. There was a seminar where Shantanu Das, who's a friend he's in Oxford now, teaching in Oxford, where he presented a paper and I listened and I sort of commented on it and so on and so forth. And just yesterday I was a discussant at something. Yeah. Okay, so that's the kind of nice thing, but again, that's peculiarly bloodless and inhuman. So as to your first question, this cannot be any yardstick of success. It's not success, number one. Number two, in the specific case of the PhD, MPhil, well, MPhil will apparently be done away with, but right now it hasn't been. So PhD, MPhil, Vivas, and so on and so forth, I think is a very positive thing. Far too often, see, I have had this experience when the best external examiner for a dissertation could not be invited because that person lived somewhere which was either very far away in India or outside India. Now, once we allow this to happen, then I can send my student's thesis, or you can send your student's thesis to the best possible person. It doesn't matter where that person is living, whether it's in Delhi or Dar es Salaam. You send it to that person reads it, and you send it by email. So that business of sending a big, massive, fat thing by a post is not necessary. I think it's completely stupid anyway. So you send it by email, that person reads it by email, sends in her responses by email, conducts the Viva by email. I think it's brilliant. I think this is absolutely something that should become a regular option for MPhil PhD Vivas, to conduct, to send theses by email, to conduct Viva Voce via, online means such as is happening now. So that's a good thing. Third, do I think the future of teaching is digital or online? Digital is not the same thing as online. You did ask online. No, it can never be online. Because if you think about what you learned at Vishwabharati, despite all the kind things that you said about me, you learned much more outside the classroom, including in interactions with me outside the classroom, perhaps, than you did within the classroom. I certainly learned much more from my peers, from my seniors, from my juniors, and from my teachers over a cup of tea and a cigarette, over an adda, over these informal sessions that would happen, that some teacher has delivered a lecture and you have a question, so you follow that person outside the class. And because he or she doesn't have another class, you just stand in the corner, and then she says to you, "Chalo na ek cup cha khayashi." So you go down to the canteen and you have a cup of tea or a coffee, and you continue discussing and you continue talking. That's where real learning takes place. And believe you me, Saurabh, this is true not only for the humanities, it is equally true for the sciences and for technical disciplines like engineering or medicine. In all exchange and learning, this is there. However, I do think that the pandemic has revealed to us that we can do quite a bit with limited resources if we are interested. I'll give a very specific example. Just before we went live, you were talking about the fact that your college is in a relatively underdeveloped area and so on and so forth. Now that we've done this, and now that perhaps your college has got the infrastructure, it may be possible for you to invite somebody, not just like me, but from anywhere in the world, to deliver a lecture to your students online. This possibility has opened up. So this can benefit your students. Far too often what has happened is colleges have said, na taka nei, TADA dite parbo na, uni jodi Kolkata theke ashen, dudin ekhane rakhte hobe. Now you say you don't have to pay the guy anything. If you're kind, you can say pay him 500 rupees honorarium or whatever, $1,000 is honorarium. Jatayat, khawa dawa, kichu dite hobe na. Just invite the person. You log in, you talk to your students, you have an extended 1.5, 2 hour session. I notice we are already an hour and 10 minutes into this adda. And this can happen, and this can be seen by the students, it can be interactive. So it can be a positive way of bringing people and resources together. However, I don't think as long as we remain the sort of animals which we are, which is profoundly social, teaching real face-to-face teaching can ever be replaced. We can, of course, make use of resources much better. And I think that will be one positive takeaway from this pandemic, that we were forced to innovate. We were forced to innovate. You are forced to do this kind of thing, and I notice you're recording it. So, sometime, someday, you might be able to use it, and use it for something to talk about. So we are, whether we like it or not, we are creating a repository of lectures, of documents, of images, of texts, which we can use creatively later on. I expressed the wish at one of the webinars I was asked to speak at, that every college should start a repository. It sounds big, repository. All it means is a hard drive, man. It's a 1 TB hard drive where you dump all of these things that are there, and allow anybody who wants to use it to take it away on a pen drive. And that can be your repository. So, yes, I think it will be there will be much more use of digital resources, electronic resources, and the internet for teaching. But the sort of things that you and I enjoy and miss cannot be replaced. I, for one, would not like to be a student in an institution where all my teachers are these virtual avatars on screens. I would hate it. I'd switch my video off and go out to smoke something.
Yes. True, sir.
Well,
very true. So I'll come to my next question. It again has two parts. Would you take us through any alternative modes of education that you have written about in your articles? And how effectively do you think that these can be adapted in our country?
Okay, now, huge question, alternative modes. I will confine myself to alternative modes using digital, electronic means and the internet. Because alternative modes of education, really alternative modes of education, like the Barefoot College in Tilonia, Rajasthan, or what was Rabindranath's initial plan for Vishwabharati, that it would be an institution of higher learning which would not award degrees. These are real alternatives, the alternatives that Ivan Illich speaks of in Deschooling Society, or that Paulo Freire speaks of in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. These are real alternatives, but this is not the time, I think, to discuss them. I would like a situation where education is a lifelong process, it's a continuous process, and our achievements in education are not judged by the marks on these little slips of paper that we carry around. So that alternative is something I dream of, and maybe one day I will be able to do something about it, but that's not what I'm really talking about here. I'm talking of alternatives within the broad paradigm of 12 years of schooling or 15 years of schooling, as the NEP says now, and then 3 years or 4 years of undergraduate education, and then a couple of years of masters, and then maybe a PhD and whatever, and so on and so forth. So where alternative modes and models are concerned, I want to refer to two Bangalis. I'm being parochial here, but two Bangalis who have done very interesting things in the last 10 years. One of the Bangalis is a man called Sugato Mitro and his hole-in-the-wall experiment, which I was speaking of the last day. Well, Sugato was the head of educational technology services, something like that, of the NIIT. And basically what he did is he took a high-speed internet connection and a large computer screen and a mouse which you could operate by hand and a keyboard, and stuck it on the wall of a slum in Delhi. And pretty soon he found that students, young children, were using it to learn things. That hole-in-the-wall experiment evolved into something that he's begun to call SOLE, the self-organized learning environment, in recent years. And after he won the 1 million TED award, I think in 2017, 16 or 17, he used that to set up about a dozen such SOLEs across the world, in schools as well as outside schools, community SOLEs. And now he talks about it as the school in the cloud. Now, this is not merely a question of giving a kid a laptop and saying, find out things for yourself. No, it is cooperative. In fact, recently I was reading an article in which somebody was criticizing Sugato Mitro's model by saying that, oh, he wants to do away with the role of the... Sugato says is that in order for the hole-in-the-wall experiment or the SOLE or the school in the cloud, whatever you call it, to be successful, you need, number one, a large screen, not a small screen. Because a large screen is something in which not only can you see things, but others can see what you are seeing. So, when I hold up a small screen like this, I can be watching porn on it for all you know, right? I can just hide it and do rubbish on it. But if I'm doing it on a large screen, everybody else will see what I'm looking at. So it has... We've gone off again. Oh, we are back. It has to be a large screen in a room. The group has to be heterogeneous. You cannot have all children in the same age group or at the same learning level. So they will help each other out. And the questions must be difficult questions. They must be big questions, is what he calls it. Like, for example, can plants think? That's a big question. And students will then start figuring things out. So that's a very interesting way of allowing students to learn on themselves. Now, at one level, it's tremendously innovative. At another level, this is basically what we were doing when we were hanging around in our canteens and in our addas and in the Jadavpur lobby. We were not all the time only, pursuing, other members we wanted to get into bed with or smoking illegal substances. Yes, we did a bit of that. But a lot of the time was spent in discussing social, political, and academic affairs. And we learned from each other. So we learned not only from our seniors, but from our juniors, from students in other departments, and so on and so forth. That is the SOLE. And if you have a big question, not a syllabused question, a really big question, what happens to our soul? Do human beings have souls? Can ants fall in love? Something like that, And you start looking things up, and you start learning things. So that's a very innovative and alternative way of learning, which is possible to integrate in small ways in our own pedagogic practices. And the second is an experiment which is running now. It's called the flipped classroom by a chap called Salman Khan, not the Dabang guy. This is a Bengali Salman Khan, Sal Khan, who lives in the US. His father's from Kolkata, mother's from Borishal, I think. He's Bengali. Well, I keep saying Bengali like a bloody chauvinist now. I'm just proud to be a Bengali. And he talks of the flipped classroom, where the usual way in which classrooms operate is flipped. So what happens in a typical classroom? The teacher teaches you a technique. Let's say something very simple. The teacher is teaching you that multiplication is just addition done several times. So you are shown that. And then in order to understand whether you've understood the principles or not, you are given problems to solve. And you go home and you solve the problems and you bring them back. And the teacher looks at them and then goes on to something else. Now, there are several problems here. The first problem, and you and I have encountered it, Saurabh, as has anybody who's ever taken a class of more than one person, the levels of understanding and learning are not the same, cannot be the same. The larger the class, the more heterogeneous the group. even if they are all exactly from the same socioeconomic background. Some will have better knowledge, some will have read more, others will be more enthusiastic, others will be not interested. So what typically happens is that we end up aiming at the middle of the class, or maybe a little bit above the middle of the class. We know that those who are really not interested, they will never become interested. And we know that if we address only the top guys, then we'll leave the rest of the class behind. So, you like mean, median mode, like a bell curve, you end up talking to the guy at the 60th percentile level or the 70th percentile level. Now, what Sal Khan says is, we flip the classroom. We tell the students, this is the chapter, you learn it at home. You go home and you learn it, and you have learning devices to do it. A fantastic resource called the Khan Academy. Just khanacademy.org, which enormous resources, and it's entirely free. So you log into the Khan Academy and you look at multiplication or Boolean algebra or whatever. I'm deliberately using example from mathematics. It could just as easily be Shakespearean tragedy, or the history of the Peloponnesian War, or the formation of rock strata. So you look it up, and then when you come back, you solve problems in the classroom. Because it's your problem-solving ability which the teacher can look at and point out, okay, you're not doing this right, or you can do this better. And so what will happen is, in the same classroom, you will have students who are at different levels. So let's imagine that there's a book which has 10 chapters. And roughly around the middle of the year, some of the students will have gone on to the 10th chapter. Some will still be struggling at the second chapter. Most will be grouped around the 5th, 6th, 7th chapter, or so on and so forth. The teacher will be able to help all of them, and they will progress at differential rates. So the notion of a class, like class 6, class 5, class 4, class 8, class 9, সেটাও কমে যাবে বা অদৃশ্য হয়ে যাবে. It's a flipped classroom model. Again, what both of these models have in common, which I find fascinating, and I may or may not have tried out this little experiment when you were at Vishwabharati, but I've done it subsequently in Vishwabharati and Jadavpur. One of the things that our higher education, and indeed all our education from school to the highest levels, one of the things it does not teach us is how to assess ourselves. Now, typically what happens is that we either underestimate or overestimate our capacities. Now, what I have started for a few years is, for internal assessments, I often ask students to either assess themselves or to assess their peers. And funnily enough, invariably enough, they are much harder at assessing themselves and their peers than I am. On average, not just average, the overwhelming measure. There will always be one or two who, just to test, acha Samantak da boleche assess korte nijeke, I'm going to give myself a 10 on 10. Fine, you give yourself a 10 on 10. But most of them will be giving themselves grades which are probably less than one I would have given them. And then I ask them, why did you give yourself 7 on 10? And they have to answer. What usually happens is, you're given a question, you answer it to the best of your ability given the prevailing circumstances. So, whatever the circumstances may be, and then you submit it, and then you wait for the results, and you don't really know what you're going to get. And you get it and you say 8 on 10, very happy, yay. Or you get 5 and you say, harami, or whatever, But do you ever ask yourself, why have I got a 6 on 10? Why have I got a 7 on 10? How can I become a little better? You don't. Why do you not ask it? Because the system doesn't encourage it. Now, what Sugato Mitro's hole in the wall experiment and Sal Khan's flipped classroom do is, they help you to assess yourself, because you don't progress until you are satisfied that you know something in the flipped classroom. You don't go another step towards the big answer to the big question until you have understood what is happening. And not only have you understood, but your fellows who are around you are agreed that whatever. Now, this is something which I think should be integrated into our teaching programs, where the student assesses herself and doesn't just leave it up to somebody like you or me. Because when that happens, the possibility of bias creeps in. I don't like a particular ethnic group or a particular religious group or a particular gender, I might be biased against them. And mind you, when I'm talking of assessment, I'm not talking of you assessing yourself versus me assessing you. I'm talking of you assessing yourself amongst your cohort, so amongst your classmates. So you know what each one has done. You know why Y has got this and why X has got this, or at least you try to know. And it then becomes my task as a teacher to tell you, look, this is the reason why I think you should get more than the 7 you have awarded yourself, or why I think you should get less than the 8 that you have awarded yourself. But if you leave it to the student to give the final grade, in all the years that I've tried it, I have never once had a student who wanted far more than I would normally have awarded her or him. Sometimes it's a little more. So, maybe I would have thought, okay, 6.5, 7, the student awards himself an 8. It doesn't really matter, as long as he or she knows why he or she is doing it. So these are, there are lots of examples out there in the world, Saurabh. I think what prevents us from doing any of these things is we are lazy. And unfortunately, many of our fellow teachers are not really interested in teaching. They're doing it as a job. Fine, you do it as a job, but no innovation comes out of somebody who doesn't love what he or she is doing. It's Rabindranath Jantin. You think about how many times he keeps talking of Anondo. Shikkar mule Anondo. What a strange thing to say.
Yes.
But he was right. Unless you take pleasure, unless you look forward to going to school, you're never going to learn a damn thing in school. And I use school in the largest sense, in the US sense of, attending classes, whether at the kindergarten or at the postdoctoral level. That's it. Yeah. Bolo.
Yeah. No, we are being enriched. So I have a few more questions if you have no objections, sir.
I have no objections at all. Go on.
Okay. So the next question is, do you think that there is the need for including more of the stakeholders in decision-making bodies of the education institutions and the controlling bodies, and less involvement of non-academic people?
Yes, a simple answer, yes. I think everybody who's part of any academic institution should have a say, not only when it comes to the administration of the institution, but also in terms of setting syllabi. Now, I don't see why students should not be invited to create syllabi. Obviously, I'm not going to ask an undergraduate student to set the syllabi for the master's program. But I don't see any reason why a third-year undergraduate should not be able to tell me or you why a particular text or a particular course or a particular section of the curriculum at the first-year undergraduate level should be replaced by something that is better. Young people typically know more about the world and more about new developments than somebody who's as old as I am, and I suspect somebody who's not so young as you are. So yes, they should be involved. And when it comes to non-academic people, I think we need to sort of look at it with slightly more care, because who's a non-academic person? Is the mother, the largely illiterate mother, or the father who lacks a school-going degree? Are the parents of such a child or such a person who's studying in your college, are they non-academic people? Are they stakeholders? I understand. I mean, I would say that we need to keep politicians out of it. We need to keep local residents with no stake in the matter out of it. But there can be people who may not themselves be directly involved in academics, but who might be involved, in a peripheral way. What about the man who runs the canteen? Why don't you ask him something about, how he would like the college to be run? Okay, he or she might give you silly answers, but at least by asking that person, you make that person feel involved with the college or the university. So I would say that, your question, which you were kind enough to send to me earlier, which is why I'm answering them so cleverly. I did rehearsed everything. So, yeah. So less involvement of of people who don't have anything to do with it, especially politicians and things like that. But yeah, I think most importantly, students should have a real say in all matters. And it's because students don't, that when they do get an opportunity, they take such a tremendously oppositional or obstructionist attitude. You remember, you were fortunate enough to have studied in Vishwavanati at the college level, but Rabindranath set up the Sahitya Sabha and the Vichar Sabha in Patho Bhavan. The Vichar Sabha, which would judge infringements by students, and the Sahitya Sabha, where the students would invite somebody to be the Sahapati and conduct the thing. The students were in charge. You know, he had even something like a little parliamentary model where they would elect themselves. And this is something he was doing 100 years ago, Shobha. And most schools, especially the sort of private schools that you and I have attended, most schools treat students with a sort of mixture of condescension and contempt, and as if they have done us a bloody favor by taking us in. And they speak to the parents of children in ways which are completely unacceptable, or should be completely unacceptable. You know, we really, you know, you have done a lot of good in your previous lives, and that's why your son has got into XY school, usually with the name of a saint or some dead Englishman or foreigner in it. You know, Loreto, Xavier, Namatnia. Now, I want to use several words which I'm not, because you're recording. You know what they are at this point. That's what I ask them to do. F off. We don't want you. But that's the attitude. Even in the schools that my kids have gone to, which was supposedly more liberal, teachers had that attitude. Look, we know what's best. You have now no say in the matter. We've done you a great favor by taking your child in, and you better put up with whatever shit we are throwing at them. I think the students should have a strong say in what happens in schools. And, you know, they do in a lot of places in the world, and in some places in India, students do. They should be made part of the administrative and academic structure of an institution, whether it's a primary school or a university. You know, Gandhi, in his notion of Nai Talim and Bunyadi Shiksha, he wanted students to be involved in raising funds for the school, in administering the school, in making tables and benches for the school. Forget about foreign thinkers. If you think of Gandhi, if you think of Rabindranath, no, they were both talking of involving students in a school. And yet we've just followed the old colonial model where the teacher is some kind of master with a whip, you know, whipping students into shape. I think that's absolutely terrible. Next question.
Yeah, the next question is again a very contentious issue. What would you think should be the role of the direction of the students' politics in educational institutions in our country? Should there be students' union in the colleges and universities at all? And if yes, should they be affiliated to the mainstream political parties and promote their agenda inside or outside the campuses? Or should they be concerned only with the issues concerning students in their academic spheres? I'm not suggesting that the students who are our future be holed up in their campuses and not voice their concerns about social issues. But what I'm asking is that if they should be involved in such movements, if they wish to, independently or as part of the machinery of a bigger political party. Your views on that?
Yeah, well, okay. First of all, I have never belonged to a students' union. You know, well, I belong to a students' union by virtue of being a student and voting for students' union elections, but never held office in a students' union, never stood for elections under a political party's banner from the time I was an undergraduate student, despite having been asked by various kinds of political formations. Don't know whether you could call them parties. Now, I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea, provided that the political party, the parent body, whether it is the BJP, RSS, CPI, CPM, CPI, whatever the latest Naxal formation is, provided the political party has the maturity and the wisdom to allow the students much greater leeway in doing what they are doing. And if students are able to exercise this right in order to go, if necessary, go against the diktats of the parent body on certain issues. Now, this became very apparent to us in the last few years of the CPI, well, the left front led by the CPIM in West Bengal, when the Students' Wing, the Students' Federation of India, SFI, they were defending the indefensible. What happened in Nondigram is defending the indefensible. And privately, SFI leaders would say to me that, we know what happened there is wrong, but we belong to this party. We cannot go against the party. And I argued with them. I said, look, why not? Why can you not say? Do you have to be so conformist? No political party should be a monolith. In fact, if you look at the evolution of political parties at any time, anywhere, Saurabh, you will see it is the dissidents who have usually led to a change in the party position. The same dissidents who in the years of the CPM, when computers were first introduced, led dharnas of banks because they felt computers would be, would take away jobs. And the SFI was saying that, and this is when we were students, they were able to they were able to change their position to embrace technology in certain ways. I'm talking of the CPM because it's the political party that I have sort of grown up with. They were in power when I was a student in school. They were in power when I was a student at college and university. They were in power for the first, 20 years of my career as a teacher. So I use them not as examples of what is bad or wrong, but I use them and their student political group, the Students' Federation of India, to talk about what I was saying. So ideally, I would like political parties to keep their hands off student unions, but given the reality of our country, it may be necessary for them to have a say in these matters, as long as it doesn't go out of hand. I was fortunate. I was in Jadavpur University, where although the SFI was always a strong presence, it was never like the colleges we heard of, where the students' unions decided who would get admitted, or the students' unions, would tell teachers, "Aste habe na, go away." That never happened in Jadavpur. Even those of our teachers who were very, who were very clearly members of political parties and made no effort to hide it, they never allowed their politics to judge their, decisions or cloud their judgments as academics. So if that is possible, I see no reason why there should not be student unions. In fact, I think students' unions should exist at all levels. Apolitical at the school level and maybe political at the college and university level. And of course, when you say they should be concerned with academic matters, again, I ask myself and I ask you, what is an academic matter, Shobha? Can an academic matter be divorced from the larger society of which these institutions are a part? Can an academic matter be divorced from larger questions of inequities, inequalities, of age-old repressions and oppressions, whether it is in terms of caste or religion or gender? You cannot escape it. And you cannot escape it even in notionally impartial disciplines like medicine or engineering. The way in which women are excluded from these spaces, how can they be included, what has happened to women scientists? These are all part of the evolution of science and technology. And so these are politics in the larger sense. I get your point that what I would say is that the orientation of a students' union, as opposed to that of a labor union, or for that matter, even a teachers' union. That is a kind of labor union, I suppose. But, what I meant is, as opposed to a factory labor union, more physical work, or tea planters, tea garden workers unions, and, other unions. I think the orientation of a students' union should be academic. And it should be our duty to encourage them to look at both sides of a question, because that at the end of the day is what an academic orientation teaches you to do, right? Not to dismiss something merely because it comes from X, or Y, or accept something because it comes from Y. So students' unions, in my opinion, should take a kind of academic approach to any problem that they are looking at, whether it is within or outside the institution. And I'm a strong champion of student unions. I've said it, written about it, spoken about it time and time again. I volunteer, as I did again this year, for student election duty in my university, although some of my more, shall I say, erudite and sensitive colleagues were upset that I was still doing it. But I think it's part of what trains students, and perhaps the most important reason why student unions should exist is because they prepare you for the real life outside and after college or university.
Okay. And the final question. Today is, do you think that due to the impact of the economic meltdown resulting in pay cuts and even at times loss of jobs, there might be a huge surge in the dropout rates, as many students might try to get odd jobs instead of attending schools and colleges to augment their family incomes? And if that happens, how do we remedy that, and what should be the government's role?
Okay. I think, first of all, Saurabh, we have to begin from the brute fact that roughly 70%, let's say, for the sake of complication, it's 2/3, 66.66% of the students in colleges and universities in our country go to private institutions. Now, no government has any actual control over these private institutions when it comes to matters like fees and so on. Governments can appeal, but governments cannot mandate. Governments cannot say, okay, I'm going to take away the act whereby Amity University was allowed to set up campus in West Bengal, or Adamas University, or whatever. Government can't do that. Government can't say that, okay, I'm going to take away affiliation from Macau from your institution of whatever, engineering, because you're not conforming to this. Government really can't do that. So for that 66.66%, I fear that dropout rates will be higher, and that we will lose a portion of our bright young minds to the semi-skilled or unskilled, virtually unskilled job market. And they will be driven by economic compulsions. Now, I should have said right at the beginning, as I had planned to, that you and I are enormously lucky, because even during a pandemic, we are receiving our salaries on time. And in fact, your salary and mine have gone up during this pandemic, because the pay commission was, yes. I don't know when you started getting your
implemented
salary. I started getting it, in during this period. So not only have we not lost our pay packets or had them reduced, we've had them increased, and we are extraordinarily fortunate. And I'm proud of you, Saurabh, that instead of just sitting at home and not doing anything, you're at least, dragging an old bearded man out and doing something with this time. So yeah, okay. So we are lucky. So okay. And what I was saying is about, so yes, there will be dropouts for government institutions, for public institutions. I think that we need to be sensitive to those students who may be thinking of dropping out. And that is where I think modern channels and modes of communication can come in useful. Let me, at the cost of being, labeled arrogant, everybody knows I am, tell you about something that we did in our department. What we did is, in every class, we identified 2 or 3 sort of class representatives, or nodal persons or point persons. And we asked them to contact every single one of their classmates by phone, not by email, not by WhatsApp, to call them up and speak with them. And we sent all our students, some 300 students of the Department of Comparative Literature, from the first year undergraduates to the PhD scholars, all our contact details, our emails, our telephone numbers, our WhatsApp numbers. Formally, they have gone out to every single student of our department. And they were told that if you have any problem, feel free to contact any one of us. And they have. It's not always that they're suffering from psychological distress, although that has been. In some cases, it has been a simple case of running out of money because, in the initial days, 4-hour lockdown imposed on 4 hours notice. Students were stuck in messes and PG accommodations. Money was not being forthcoming from their parents or whatever, so they were running out of money. Some students needed some medical care, so we were able to provide it to them. Now, what I'm saying is that before a student drops out, there are usually some warning signs. So she will confide to a friend, "Janis to, ashe semester ami hoyto aste parbo na." Or she will tell a teacher maybe, "Saurabh da, I may not see you next year. My father's lost his job and I have to start working." Or his business has taken a beating and he's had to let 2 of his workers go. I have to work in his shop. So we are likely to get forewarnings of possible dropouts. And then we have to intervene the best we can. Jadavpur University has taken one decision, which is that every student who was affected by Cyclone Amphan, financially, first of all, we are helping them and so on and so forth. But their fees have been waived. So they don't have to pay even the fairly small amounts that they have to pay. So their tuition fees have been waived. Their hostel fees have been waived. So all students affected by Amphan in Jadavpur University, irrespective of the stage, they no longer have to pay any fees to the university for their studies or for their hostel. Now, these are not very large sums of money, but it all adds up. So perhaps this could be done by colleges, and maybe government could compensate colleges by, making up for the losses that were incurred by students, because college fees are still at fairly low levels, right? I mean, what is the fee in your college? At a UG te koto taka debe mashe? What's 500 rupees?
Not the mashe. It is less than 2,000 rupees for a year. That is annual fees. That includes tuition fees for 3 months.
So that's 200 rupees. Yeah, that's okay. So that's 200 rupees. So I'm saying, even if it's 500 rupees a month, it's not a very large sum of money. So dropouts can be prevented not through some kind of blanket waiver of fees, which is what student unions will want, but by saying, okay, you've had a problem, here we are. So one, tuition waivers, waiver of tuition fees. 2, waiver of hostel charges. 3, provision of scholarships. That you give short-term scholarships for a year. Okay, at bochorer jonne we are giving you a scholarship, and that scholarship should take the form of money which is given to the student. So the student can use it to buy books or groceries as the need may be. Okay, so if you peg that at, let's say, 8,000 rupees a month, I think that should be enough to enable those students who are genuinely interested in staying back and not dropping out. It will provide that little support which is necessary. And government has to come forward to do this. I think with that, dropout rates can actually be stopped. Look, there will always be a few dropouts because of peculiar personal circumstances, lack of interest in studies and so on. Those you can't pretend. But if you find that as a result, as you say, of the economic blow of COVID-19, that a student is having to drop out, I think it is our responsibility to try and make sure that he or she does not drop out, and to provide what we can. And what we can provide is to say, okay, you don't have to pay any fees to the college, you don't have to pay exam fees, you don't have to pay hostel fees if you're staying in the hostel. And look, here's 8,000 rupees a month for the next 12 months until such time, or until the end of your course or whatever. And we can even tie it up with academic performance. So let's say if a first year student does this, you give the person the money and say that you have to maintain a GPA of so and so. You have to maintain an average of 60% in your exams. Give them that.
I think I have lost Samantak. I'm waiting for him. I think I've lost him. Okay, fine, no problem. I had actually finished my questions, all that I had planned to do with him. I'm waiting, still waiting. I think he might come back. Yeah. I'm afraid I've overstressed you, and
No.
I've overstretched you a bit, and I'm very sorry for that. We are winding up. So before we wind up, any word of advice to the students community in general during this time of crisis, so that they're able to cope with it better and come out stronger?
Okay. First word of advice is don't listen to advice given by a man with a white beard who's 55 years old. That is the most sensible thing for you to do. Don't listen to me. That's the most important advice you will get. Don't even listen to Saurabh because he's a teacher. But do remember that this will come to an end. It will not come to an end in the sense that the SARS-CoV-2 virus will go away. It will not come to an end in that people will not be affected by COVID-19. We will learn to live with it as we have learned to live with other viruses like the AIDS virus, like malaria, like dengue, like other diseases like measles and smallpox. We have learned to live with it. So that will take a bit of time. 6 months, maybe a year, maybe a year and a half. We have to keep our spirits up. And I would like to use 2 words that were used by the great Turkish novelist, incidentally a Nobel Prize winner, Orhan Pamuk. He said that what this pandemic has taught us, or what it should teach us, is humility and solidarity. This virus has taught us that our high caste, our high income, our high political connections will not protect us. It will not protect us if we live in fancy air-conditioned rooms, and it will not protect us if we live in a bus. We are all equal in the face of this virus. So it behoves us to be a little humble in the face of this pandemic which is sweeping the world. That's the first thing. And the second thing is solidarity. We have to express solidarity with those who are less fortunate than us, more fortunate than us, as fortunate as us, because we human beings are ultimately social creatures. And the greatest pleasure that we get, and I'm not making this up, is by helping others. So help others. Helping others doesn't mean that you have to go out of your house every day and serve the sick and the poor and the needy. There's lots of things that you can do. I could spend a couple of hours telling about the kinds of things that people are doing. You know, online, offline. Just going to your next door neighbor and asking him or her that, look, do you need help with the groceries? Is a way of help. Call up your own relatives, friends you've lost in touch with. What is the worst thing that will happen? That you'll call up somebody and say, no, Rana, I have to phone call. Rana will say, get lost. I don't want to talk to you. What will happen? But there are friends, there are relatives, there are people you have not connected with for years. I mean, one of the good things that has happened to me is that somebody like Saurabh has got back in touch with me, and here I am. I'm watching him after 2 decades, chatting with him. It's a great pleasure. So reconnect with the people in your life, and don't feel sorry for yourselves. Feeling sorry for oneself never did anybody any good. And as I said, most importantly, don't take my advice. I'm too old and too set in my ways to say anything new. Thank you.
Okay, please ignore that advice and please do listen to what he has to say, because that is what I have done throughout my life, and here I am. Okay, so I'll not bother him anymore. we have questions, sir, but thank you, sir. I am what I am all because of you and teachers like you.
I don't know if you want. I don't know. I could take a couple of questions if you're up to it, Saurabh, if you're not too bad.
No, sir, I'm not taking any questions because that was not my plan, and I have other obligations. So we'll wind up. We'll wind up. Okay. So before we
nice T-shirt, I go.
Yeah, that's it. Great. So just a few parting words from me before we go. We have come to the end of this very fruitful session, and I'm sure our listeners have been greatly benefited by your wisdom this evening, as I have been. We call it a day here, and I thank you once again, sir. And sign off with the hope that we'll be able to overcome this crisis in education and the pandemic very soon. Till then, be careful, stay safe, all of you. Goodbye and good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.